Hello, I'm Daniel, and welcome to the Emunah Project. The date of this video, we are a few days away from the Jewish holiday of Passover, so I think it's time that we have a video on the basic concept of chametz, chumetz. We are not allowed to consume or even possess chumetz during the week of Passover, 7 days in Israel, 8 days outside of Israel. So it's important to know exactly what chumetz is. Okay, there's 3 factors go into chumetz. Anything that is or is made from the 5 species of grain: wheat, rye, barley, oats, and spelt. Step 1. If it is or is made from those grains, and secondly, it comes into contact with water, it gets wet, and thirdly, it remains standing, even with nothing else done, it remains until it rises or ferments. So these 3 factors: wheat, rye, barley, oats, spelt, gets wet and is left long enough for it to ferment. That is chametz, and we're forbidden. So anything made from that, bread, muffins, pizza, beer, whiskey, waffles, anything made from flour, from those 5 species, that's chumetz. We're forbidden from eating it. We're forbidden to possess it. So if it's not matzah, and we're going to get to matzah in a second, you can't eat it. So the question is, why isn't matzah chumetz? Think of the 3 steps. Matzah can be made out of wheat, rye, barley, oats, spelt, and it comes in contact with water. It's kneaded and baked, and this is where the difference is with matzah. The 3rd step: it's not allowed to ferment or rise. Our sages say that when flour or when these grains come into contact with moisture, with water, as you need to make matzah or bread or anything, fermentation occurs at the 18-minute mark. Once the flour or the grains or whatever come in contact with water, at the 18-minute mark, they naturally start the fermentation process. And this is why matzah is allowed, because even though it can be made of the 5 species, and even though it comes in contact with water, from the time, let's use wheat for an example, from the time the wheat flour comes in contact with the water, and it's blended, and it's kneaded, and it's rolled out and baked, from the time it touches the water to the time it's baked, it's less than 18 minutes. So that 3rd step, the fermentation, doesn't occur. If it goes over the 18 minutes, it's chumetz. We can't eat it on Passover. So that's crash course on chumetz. But flour, regular flour, although it doesn't have to be chumetz, it's not necessarily chumetz. From my understanding of how the flour business works, it is common, or at least a common enough practice, that the kernels, let's use wheat as an example. When the kernels of wheat are gathered, they're treated, they're sprayed with water, and they're allowed to sit until the water is absorbed into the kernels. I'm presuming in order to plump them up to get more volume. They're dried and then they're milled. Because the wheat kernels come into contact with the water for a period of time and is absorbed, I'm presuming 18 minutes, but there's a doubt, we treat flour as if it was chumetz because there's a doubt. and it's a very serious prohibition. So flour in general, even though it's in a bag and even though it's not wet, unless we know that that it's shmira, it's been washed to prevent the kernels getting wet, we will presume that it's chametz. Okay, that's chametz. Another thing you should know: Ashkenazi Jews, Jews from Central and Eastern Europe, Poland, the Ukraine, the former Soviet Union, the Baltic countries, through an overabundance of caution, what they did was put on an additional prohibition called kitniot, kitnius. These are legumes. These are products which, while not technically chametz, they're not, wheat, rye, barley, oat, spelt, they share certain similarities. So, for example, rice, soybeans, corn, certain seeds. That's an added restriction. For example, and the reason for the confusion is a lot of these products you can make chametz-like things. Cornbread, rice noodles. You can make almost anything out of soy. And the seeds, they look like kernels, and so the general prohibition is chametz. An additional prohibition, kitnius, that's for Ashkenazi Jews. For example, no rice during Passover for Ashkenazi Jews. The Sephardi Jews may very well serve rice at the Passover Seder. It's strictly an Ashkenazi thing. That's kitnius. One more thing, an additional stringency. Usually for Hasidim and very, very frum, very pious, very machmer, careful people. Gebrocht. Gebrocht is, even after it's baked, for most Jews, most observant Jews, once it becomes matzah and it's under the 18 minutes, it's matzah forever. You don't have to worry about it getting it wet. You can take some matzah meal, mix in a little oil, some eggs, form it into balls, boil it, and you have matzah balls for your soup. The people who hold by gebrochts, the concern is this: you don't get the matzah wet. If you happen to be in a very, very Hasidic house, sometimes you'll see the matzah enclosed in Ziploc bags. And the concern is this: during the kneading process, there might be a tiny little bit of the matzah that didn't get wet. There may be a tiny little speck, a crumb, inside the matzah that you can't see, you don't notice, that it might get wet, it never got wet during the kneading process. So even though it's baked, if the matzah gets wet, chas v'sholom, there might be chametz, and so to avoid any question, the people who hold by gebrochts do not wet the matzah for the 7 days of Pesach. Outside of Israel, on the 8th day, I've seen this custom, they make a point of, for example, taking a piece of matzah and dipping it in wine. But for the 7 days, they're strict. So that is the crash course on chametz, kitnius, and matzah. We're going to be doing some more on another video or two, maybe on chametz. Until that time, on behalf of the Emunah Project, L'Shana Haba'ah, B'Yerushalayim, L'Ano Prosimo, Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. I'm Daniel, and thank you so much.